Hi everyone, I've got the great pleasure to have John EGAN, who is the CEO of Atelier BNP PARIBAS. We are for AI Governance Lab. Very pleased to have you on the mic, John.
Great to be with you guys. Good to talk.
We just spoke on your keynote about fakes. On this, we can have a bridge between fake news and deep fakes. How can you tell us, what can you tell us, and how could we speak about this subject?
Okay, so it's a complex topic, so let's try and simplify it first. Fake news, the way we think about it now, is a number of different meanings. People use it to, anytime somebody lies in public, people say it's fake news. People also use it, though, to describe what is often called junk news, which is deliberately spurious news sources, conspiracy sites, etc., where there is no factual basis for the news, but they're publishing content. And obviously with digital capacity now, it's very easy for people to publish content that has no fidelity, that has no truth to it, and these news sources often develop an audience. So there's both sides of it. There's the Donald Trump fake news comments about everybody who disagrees with him, and then there's the genuinely malicious sources that are creating deliberately fake news. Now, when we refer to it, we tend to also incorporate into that meaning the virality of that news as well. If a lie is just a lie, but when the lie gets retweeted by 100,000 people, then it's fake news.
It's exponential.
It's enormous, and the impact is amazing.
There is a huge impact.
Yes.
Could have a huge impact.
And it spreads so quickly. It's impossible. It's like it's trying to slow down a wildfire. You can never pour as much water on it. The fire needs to burn itself out, but it always leaves a mark. So you can still see the trees that were destroyed afterwards, even if you stop the fire. And fake news has that impact. Now, where deep fakes comes into this is the capacity to augment the impact of fake news by creating hyper-realistic video, image, audio of real people doing things and saying things they never did and never said. And that is profound because that creates a sense of paranoia, it undermines the idea of trust. How do we know that anything we're consuming is truthful anymore? That's very, very complicated, especially when it bleeds over, because some people might say, well, you can trust brands. A certain news, if you see something in Le Monde, then you know, okay, I can trust this. The problem is that a lot of the time now, these big brands are often mistakenly picking up the fake news, or at very least, they're covering the story about the fake news. So they're talking about how the fake news was spread, and even in that, they make it real. So this is kind of the crux of it, and what I was talking about today was trying to show how some of this new emerging technology is powering up the idea of fake news. It's already been proven as a social phenomenon, and how much more impactful and how much more dangerous it could actually be.
It's about also to reboot the way of thinking of a complete generation worldwide, because there is before and after platformization. What do you think about this? Is there any kind of window to reboot this? Because we are all engaged in this way.
I don't think so. Because it's not just technology. We've got the idea of connectedness is across every industry. When we think about our money now as well, if we think about media matters because media is the spread of ideas. And if you can spread ideas very, very, very quickly, then it prevents all sorts of different arbitrage. That arbitrage can be financial arbitrage, it can also be informational arbitrage, it can be conceptual arbitrage. We now live in a world where, unless you were to switch off the internet for everybody, which is not going to happen, then it's next to impossible to stop the idea of virality, the idea of any message given the right tone of voice, the right timing, and the right actors involved in the distribution of the message. It's very difficult to stop. And we see this over and over and over again, that you can create a strategy to maximize the spread of a particular message. And that's there's too many incentives to do that for it to be prevented. But I don't think it's just about digital platforms, it's across. We see it in we see it in regulation now. We see it in finance. We see it in the governance of data and things as well. It is a significant risk, a significant concern, but one that doesn't seem necessarily mitigable at the moment.
You mentioned that we are in a data governance area. What about the algorithms? Because there is the engine and the fuel of the engine. How can we put the MVP of the trust within all the value chains, from the data, from the engine itself, admin, machine learning, AI, governance itself?
So I'm sure some data scientists will disagree with me on this one, but the algorithm itself, a lot of algorithms will, I suppose, become somewhat commoditized, and it's only a part of the problem because the integrity of the algorithm can be upheld. Indeed, we're writing lots of algorithms now to establish the fidelity of other algorithms. We see it in finance, where there's companies who are creating ways of testing financial algorithms to ensure that they are high fidelity, they don't make mistakes, they don't accidentally break the law or whatever else. But that's not the issue. The issue is the inputs. The engine is fine. We can create a great algorithm, a great engine, but it's the fuel that we put into it that really matters. It's the data. The data that we are putting these algorithms to work on, it's still a subjective question. And I think there's two sides to this. One is, I believe that what we will begin to see is the emergence of data markets, where data as an asset class gets traded actively by people who get paid a lot of money. And if you think about the financial markets, what we're already beginning to see is the decline, at least, and maybe the death of active equities. So active equities, asset management. So people who are active equities traders are being replaced by algorithms, which makes a lot of sense. And we probably continue to see that. But at some point, you need to begin to see active trading in the data market that you push into those algorithms to make those trades. And that's still subjective. Which data sets do you choose? Which sources do you choose? How do you combine them? How do you update them, renew them? That's tricky.
Do you think that it should be in this way, a regulation on the data brokerage? Because there is many data broker, and it could be helpful, but there is also the other side of the aspect.
So my view, we're still very early in this conversation, even though it seems sometimes like we've gone too far already. But we're only at the beginning. And my strong feeling on this is that the way to do effective data regulation, as it becomes more complex in future decades, is to ensure that the creator of the data owns the data, unless they try and sell that data. So as individuals or corporations, any data generated by us should be ours. If that is a fundamental value of your society, then the regulatory part becomes much simpler. If that's not the case, the constraints and the problems, the challenges become very complex. Now, there are issues to this as well, because we already know that data has great value. At an individual level, it doesn't have significant value, but it's increasing. How do we begin to... We need to allow people to sell an asset that they own, that's valid. We live in free market societies. If somebody wants to sell their data, they should be allowed to do that, but we need to consider security as well and what that means. And the second part is, data is a peculiar asset, because if I sell you my phone, you can take my phone and you can throw it out the window and destroy it if you want to. It's yours to do what you want. You've paid me for it. I have the money, you have the phone, it's yours now. But if I sell you my data, you can't do whatever you want with it, because it still represents me, and you could still malign me in some way. So it's a very strange asset that doesn't resemble any other asset that we have. So for me, I think when we think about it right now, money is a very complex asset to regulate. Data is exponentially more complex than money. But even with money, we guarantee that the person who generates the money owns the money until they get rid of it. The same with companies. Data is peculiar in that we do not yet guarantee that I, as the creator of the data, or the individual that the data is linked to, own or control that data. That seems just fundamentally wrong and flawed, and I don't think you can create trust. I don't think you can create effective regulation until you ensure that people own their own data.
Sure, sure. So it joined the quite 2 days ago. There was the third, les 30 ans de Internet with Tim Berners-Lee. He provided a call to action to reboot this, but we have now the toolbox to address the subject.
Yeah.
He drives the Solid project to bridge this gap that you mentioned. Do you think it's possible, or it's in some kind of way an utopia?
I probably some sort of utopia, because when the internet was created, it was a single concept. It didn't exist, so they were creating a functioning prototype, and they developed protocols to make sure that prototype worked the way they want to. Now it's a living organism. Not only is it a living organism, it is the most comprehensive living organism that we've created, that humankind have ever created. It is everywhere. It's connecting billions of devices and people and animals and crops and atmospheric breeders, everything. And then it's not just on Earth. It's connecting interplanetary. It's connecting satellites. So it is this extraordinary organism that now has a life of its own. It is not realistic to think we can control the internet. So I think taking that approach, we're trying to control the internet, is a wrong approach. We need to begin to consider where we can control usage of the internet. So we need to look at it from the other way around. Who are the agents using it, not the internet itself? Because the internet can't be held responsible for the things that are produced on the internet. But we can begin to say we have certain ethical protocols which we establish for certain usage. I think this comes back to, in my view, it all comes back to data ownership. That's where you begin with this. But you could say, to give an example that's slightly off topic, but there is a significant issue with social media and the tone of voice that is used on social media, how aggressive it can be, the amount of belligerent attitude, the amount of harm that is done, that hurt is delivered onto people, bullying, etc., and abuse that happens on social media is appalling. And it seems very difficult to solve for. The private companies who own these networks don't necessarily have any incentive to fix it, but governments aren't necessarily sophisticated enough to do so. And it's very difficult to understand, how does a government regulate against that sort of abuse for an organization that is multinational, that works differently in different places? That's a new sort of problem for us. I mean, for me, I think that, again, you bring this back to data ownership and identification. I personally believe that on Twitter, for example, there should be a switch where you can turn off everybody who's not a verified individual, not a blue tick, but everybody who's not verified for who they say they are. That if you want to cut everybody who's not verified out, you should easily be able to do that, and you just don't see them, you don't hear from them. They live in a deep social web then instead. But it's an extraordinarily complex concept that I think the only way we can really get to come to terms with it is through considering the companies that are the empires in control of these spaces, and the individuals or the users who use it. So I think trying to manage the internet at this point is a lost cause. It's like trying to regulate oxygen.
Thank you very much, John, for this insightful discussion.
Thank you very much.
And hope that it will help all our thinking about this huge topic today and tomorrow.
Fantastic. Thanks for this.
Thank you. Next. See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.